Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to do another one of these webcasts. So this is I think the fifth in our series of Apex webcasts. And we're going to talk in this one about the talent section of the Apex GBS standards. And it's a topic that's come up in almost all of the other webcasts that we've come through, not surprisingly. Because hopefully most of the people listening to this are talent working in the GBS space, but also, of course, what are we if we're not incubators of talent and able to bring great people into the companies we work for? And I've got two colleagues with me from the Apex GPS Standards Committee. Tony Saldanha is making a return, and those of you that have watched this before will have seen him in our second webcast. So we won't ask Tony to introduce himself, but many of you will know Deborah Kops, who's the co-author of the talent chapter of the Apex Standards. And Deborah, I'm going to ask you really just for a little bit of your background story and how you came to be involved in this thing we call GBS, Apex GBS
It was
committee.
a long journey, a very long journey, as you can see from my hair color. But my career took a lot of twists and turns over a number of years. I'm actually trained as an architect. What architecture does is teach you how to connect the dots. And if you look at GBS in its essence, it's about connecting the dots across the enterprise, across tasks, across processes, across expertise. So fairly big grounding. I've been a GBS leader twice. I've been an outsourcer twice, and I've also been a consultant twice. So long journey makes a lot of sense to me, but not a lot of other people.
And how did you come to be involved in this Apex GBS
Tony is
exercise?
very persuasive.
And what I would say is that, having read through, because I've read through all the chapters of the Apex book, the talent section is one of those ones that really grew as we went from version one to version two. And I know you put a lot personally into that. Um, it's if we want to get into this subject of GBS talent, you actually come at it in the book from several different perspectives, from the perspective of the enterprise, from the talent themselves, and various other things. I think we use that to have this conversation. But let's start from the perspective of the enterprise and maybe the GBS leader. What matters from a talent perspective when you're looking at that? And let's start with you, Deborah, and then Tony, you chip in with things that you see.
Well, in some respects, a GBS leader is no different from any other enterprise leader. Um, they have to be able to lead people. They have to be able to take selective risks, certainly in GBS, as in other corporate functions and business, being able to manage your stakeholders is really critical. That's why you see several leader personas. Many of the folks who are taking the helm of our GBS organizations today are what I call loyalists. They've come up through the business. They understand the
Yeah.
business. They know where all the skeletons are buried. They have very deep relationship with stakeholders. And to be honest with you, some of our best leaders were basically voluntold to go into the GBS space for a range of reasons. It could be developmental. It could be calm the waters after some torrid expert from the outside came in and turned everything upside down and then either left or was run out of town on a rail, one or the other. But we've got to stop thinking that GBS leaders are exceptionally special.
Yeah.
But having said that, they are special because running a function or a business line is very different from taking the helm of a model. A model is transitory. Finance is not transitory, it's regulated. HR, we still will work on people even after the robots take over the world. Business lines still need leadership. And the fact that a GBS leader has to justify the model every day makes basically puts a lot of their leadership skills, under a magnifying glass. But net same skills you need to succeed elsewhere, probably because the fragility or the or temporal nature of the model. We expect, um, look, it tries the soul, let's put it that way.
The enterprise view of talent is incredibly important. And Deb just gave a very eloquent answer on, why new GBS leaders that suddenly get moved or voluntold or whatever it is
Yeah.
from their functional roles find themselves in a totally different industry, because GBS is a very different
Yeah.
industry. It's a combination of the BPO industry and consulting industry in some ways, along with a few other skill sets that are needed. So
I
what
think
tends
more
to
than a
happen?
few, yes.
Yes. And so what tends to happen is that, now you've suddenly inherited not just an area to run, mostly via influence, as Deb said, but then you've inherited, more likely than not, offshore centers and outsourcing deals. And so you have to very quickly pick up the strategies on how to make sure that your 1,000 people in these offshore locations aren't moving out in droves because they have no career paths. Or, how to make sure that your BPO partners are running good offshore centers, or your, consulting partners are actually driving the transformation that you expect to drive. So all of this essentially needs an approach. And so in version 1 of the book, I think that was our attempt to basically create a model to say, hey, congratulations, you've just been parachuted into this entirely new
Yeah.
role. Is there something out of our experience and all of our gray hair that we could advise you on? And that was the attempt.
So you got me thinking, Deb, because I've worked for a lot of loyalists in setting up GBSs, and I think they do tend to be quite successful because they have that context and understanding. They often don't stay for long term, and it's often what, in my observation, been their last role in the company.
It can
Um,
be. It can be.
yeah,
I think it depends why a company puts in a loyalist leader.
yeah,
There's a very well-known retailer out there that has a GBS leader who is allegedly being groomed to be CEO of the company. I can think of a few. So
yeah,
it doesn't stay very long. But I would even say that some of what I call an expert, someone goes to
yeah,
from serial GBS organizations, leadership roles,
yeah.
etc. They only last 3 to 4 years.
That's probably true too, because
So
it's a difficult job. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a difficult job. When you
yeah,
see someone stay a long time, that and those of us who advise these organizations find that often there's a lot of stasis in the organization. Nothing's changed.
yeah,
If you think about the nature of GBS, you always have to be on your toes. It is not terra firma. You always have to change. The business change, you have to change. And um, I would say steadiness, being able to foresee what happens every day does not, it is, you can't find it in a GBS
no, 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 no,
um,
no.
organization. But I think, yes, you're right about loyalists, but experts also don't
Yeah,
last very long.
yeah. Have you done numbers on this? Have you
Oh, I
studied?
have done
Yeah,
numbers on
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely
I
done
thought you
numbers
might.
on this.
I thought you
I've studied.
might.
I've actually studied, is there a lot of movement between industries?
Yeah,
Yes, there is, except for financial services. You don't find financial services hiring non-financial services
yeah,
GBS leaders. And and typically a CPG company doesn't want financial services.
no,
But there's a fair amount of mobility
yeah,
in this industry, and it's not the careers aren't necessarily long. That's not a bad thing.
no. No, no, it's not. Well, because you also you go through cycles. We've actually talked about, I think, Tony, on the call that we did with you, we talked about going through various cycles. And I know at P&G there were several, like 5, 6, 7 versions of that thing. And it was actually done by design.
Yes.
I think you were talking about Filippo, like pushed that cyclic view of the development of the GBS. which, by the way, always does seem to coincide with a change of leadership at the top and or within the GBS leadership team itself. What about from the point of view of the when you're approaching it from the, let's say, the GBS leader or the enterprise view, what is different about talent management in a GBS or about talent planning?
It's very poor. It's very,
Oh,
very poor. Um, First of all, a lot of us, very few GBS leaders do a very good job of succession planning. My rule of thumb is succession planning starts the day the leader occupies a seat. If you look at one of the fatal flaws of our model, why after someone leaves, whether it's voluntarily, involuntarily, is there a lot of scrabbling around for a leader? It
mm,
happens all the time. We don't see that many people promoted from within GBS.
yeah.
They are what I call lifers. There are very few folks who go from job to job to job in a GBS and then get the top job. They either at a juncture where you need new leadership, the company either goes out or they appoint a loyalist who's
Yeah.
elsewhere in the business. That's a fatal flaw in this industry. We
Mm.
don't understand how roles add up to each other. I've actually done some work looking at who is likely within a GBS to become a GBS leader.
Okay.
And it's not the center leader. It is
Yeah.
not the GPO. It is typically a functional leader if the
Yeah.
function is large enough. But
Like a finance or IT or something like that.
I've
Yeah.
actually mapped who gets that role, but we don't consciously build
Yeah.
up people's capability portfolios within GBS. First of all, most of our GBS organizations are functionally aligned. And what do? We do mini-me's.
Hmm.
We think about the function as a mirror of a GBS functional tower. And then we say, okay, you can be this and that. We see very little horizontal movement within a GBS organization, and that's a shame. A good transformer knows how to operate, but what do? We appoint transformers who have never operated a day in their lives. A good operator knows how to transform, but we pigeonhole people. It's time for us to start to think about punching a passport with capabilities and moving people around. We don't do that
Yeah.
effectively enough. We're lazy. We're
Yeah.
very lazy.
So just say a bit more about that. This moving people around. I love that concept of punching people,
Not
not
punching
punching
in the
people,
face,
punching
Tim.
passports
Punching a
with
passport.
Passports.
capabilities. I love that concept because it's something I recognize in my own development in GBS jobs, but also of the team. And I've got to tell you that there's nothing that fills me with pride more than seeing people, perhaps that I brought into a
Mhm.
GBS, getting promoted 2, 3 years later into a different role, preferably not in the first 6 months, which did tend to happen where I used to work, but more waiting 2 or 3 years. But I'm still seeing it today. People maybe we brought in 5 years, 6 years ago, still now getting promoted, and it's wonderful to see that. It's a big part of, I think, the like the transaction that you make with someone when you bring them in. You bring them in to give them the job, but also the future, if that's part of the deal. But just say a little bit more about how you punch the passports with capabilities, because
Well,
that sounds quite intriguing.
one of the things I'm seeing right now is that GBS organizations typically hire forensically. They might embellish the job description of the last person who had the role. And in an age of impending agentic and other forces, there are 36 forces, as you know, I talked about that a couple of weeks ago, 36 forces that are affecting GBS as an industry right now. The same capabilities are no longer as valid. We focus on functional capabilities, which I look at major and minor. The major should be GBS capabilities, um, process mastery, domain knowledge,
Yeah.
digital mastery, the ability to make a decision. Those are universal across GBS. The ability to understand DSO, to be honest with you, that's a minor.
Yeah.
If we really want to make people interoperable and build capabilities, we need to map
Yeah.
and we need to actively manage their careers
Yeah.
and show them where they can go. We don't do
Yeah.
that. But the good news is that I'm seeing companies out there right now who are rethinking their GBS career architecture.
Yeah.
They're trying to pivot from a functionally oriented skills base to a
Yeah.
capability oriented
Yeah.
skills base. Is it a raging trend yet? No, but I think there's a dawning realization that as agentic takes away delivery,
Yeah.
execution responsibility from GBS, we're going to have different capabilities.
Yeah.
I just to kind of build on top of that, and Deb is by far, in my knowledge and my experience across the industry, nobody even comes close. By far the best at truly getting into this particular area, researching it, having frameworks and models. So the ad that I wanted to share is that from a practitioner standpoint, what tends to happen in most companies is that you know you've inherited this GBS job, or you brought in from outside
Or
to
you
do
brought
it,
it on yourself, right?
or you brought it upon yourselves. Exactly. So what tends to happen is that you know your first order of business is usually to figure out how to put out the process fire or the cost fire or the innovation requirements or the growth requirements. Um, you've got a partner in the HR person who's supporting you. This is, in my experience, the first
Mm.
point of failure. If you happen to work in a finance industry or a consumer goods industry or pharma industry, that HR person has been trained brilliantly on hiring and developing people in that respective industry. This is really where Deb shines, because what Deb has said is, guys, the skills and capabilities that are required to run a GBS isn't exactly the same as what you need in farm. Now, of course, there is an
Yeah.
overlap, there's the
Yeah.
foundation, things like that. But there are a few nuances that actually make or break most organizations. So I think that's point one. Point two is that GBS leaders still need to understand that actually deliberately planning the career of your people is win-win. Because think about
Yeah.
it. Most GBS organizations, people that start at the entry level, they start with transactional work. That's not their aspiration for the next 50 years to continue to do transactional stuff. They're hoping for a career. However, they've joined a shared services center or a pharma company, and people aren't really showing them that ladder
Yeah.
that says, automate this. Please get rid of your own job, and then I will promote
Yeah.
you to the next.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the way it works. Instead, we're actually afraid to do that, right? And so, being the point that Deb made is incredibly important. You absolutely have to design a career
You
model
have to
inside
design.
your GBS,
Yeah.
inside your company,
Yeah.
including, by the way,
Yeah. Yeah.
rotating people between GBS and other functions,
Yeah.
and then
And
bringing
within
them back
GBS.
in. And
And
within
within.
within GBS is a given. Otherwise, you have no scale. For not for all jobs, but for at least developmental jobs, and then even outside of GBS. And I think that's really the insight that's incredibly important for new GBS leaders to know.
Yeah, but I will tell you, when I see resistance, the GBS leader seems to understand this. Their HR business partner or their CHRO, hey, it's changing the world order here. What if we have works councils, for example? How are they going to react?
Yeah.
One of the things I've suggested to the companies that I work with is that start by changing the career architecture within your centers, because you have much
Yes.
more hold,
That's within
especially
your control. Yes.
Yeah.
if you are setting up a new center. Because let's face it, what do you do in a center? It could be a dead end unless you think differently. And being able to look at interoperability of roles, because a lot of the work we do is similar. For example, lease administration for real estate and L&E administration for L&E administration for L&E for in HR are fundamentally the same job. It's just one's dealing with brick and mortar and the other is dealing with learning programs. So being able, by changing the career architecture in a center, you start to be able to reduce attrition and provide more, more fulfilling, more career paths for the people you have there. But the enemy of the people, to be honest with you, sometimes is chief people function.
Yes.
Well, look,
That's a horrible thing to say.
You set me a challenge, and I'll definitely talk to our HR business partner about this. And we're lucky we're building a greenfield GBS, so we can try some stuff. So I'll take that conversation. Hopefully, anyone listening to this or with us now can think about the same thing. Let me just turn the conversation around just to talk about it from the perspective of the GBS professional, which all of us are, but we're maybe further down the career than the people growing their careers. How should a GPS professional look at their career within the concept of GBS, and what are the things that they should be thinking about and doing? And by the way, the chapter of the book has a lot of advice on this about really understanding who you are and where you want to go. But what are your opinions on that?
I'm going to just add to that question because I would love to hear Deb talk about this. I think the reality is that most people, when they join the GBS industry, they haven't been to school to get a degree in GBS, right? They've either learned finance or IT or something like that, and they're thrown into this evolving new industry. What tends to happen is that they start at the entry level, and they're basically rolling up their sleeves and doing transactions or automation, as the case may be. And in the absence of a career architecture that Deb was talking about, they actually don't know where to go. What's my next step? So this is something that we keep hearing about constantly. What next assignment should I take? What is the move that I need to make? So one day I become a GBS leader if I stay on in this particular industry. What I love about what Deb's done through all of her experience and research is she's gotten it down to personas, which is understand thyself, understand your skills, and then here's a map on how you can essentially build on that to essentially be successful. So Deb, let me hand this over to you because I think this is incredibly important.
Well, I mean, first of all, let's call it what it is. We have tiering in our GBS organizations. We have people who transact, who execute, and we have people who manage. And the career pathways are very different for both. Let's call it what it is. And I think we all know that a good bit of the transactional work is going to be agentified away. It is going to happen. That's going to put even more pressure and create more opportunity for people who actually manage, who make decisions, who interpret, who have to collaborate, who have to have industry context. But one of the things I've identified is that they're really, if you look at that class of professionals, that level of professionals, they're really four career paths. And most of our career paths center in two buckets. If you think about a four box, and we talk about this in the report, the lower left-hand corner is the expert. Who is the expert? It's somebody who really knows, technically is quite good, who knows how to manage a process, who knows what good looks like. And what these experts do is that they may leave companies and become an expert in another company, but boy, do they know their onions. They really understand their craft. Think a GPO who goes from company to company to company, or think about someone who is a business analyst who becomes a GPO. They basically know how to get work done. This is a class who know how to get work done. Typically, they don't move. They may move within company. They're very internal, but they don't move out a lot unless they're angry or some headhunter comes calling and says, we got this great opportunity with a little bit more scope and a little bit more scale. But for the most part, they're experts. They stay broadly within a box. The next persona is the leader. They're people who know how to run stuff. They may have two expertises in their bag of tricks, but they know how to move. They have an instinct when they have to switch roles. But fundamentally, think of them as good managers. They
Yeah.
know enough to be dangerous, but they know enough to manage teams of people. They have a good command of management skills. Most of our GPS professionals are in those boxes, to be very honest. If someone really can change their risk profile and really knows how to connect the dots differently, they can move to the right. In the lower right-hand corner is what I call the adapter. The adapter is able to take what they know from being an expert, being from shared services or GBS, and apply it to different situations.
Yeah.
So think about someone who's worked in a company and then becomes an operating partner in private equity, for example. Or someone who ran marketing shared services and then goes and runs marketing operations in a big media agency. For the most part, they adapt the skills they have, but they work in a different context. They're out of GBS for the most part, but they take all those finely honed capabilities that they gained in GBS or shared services and they move out. And the upper right-hand corner is what I call the interpreter. There are people who've taken everything they've known and they take risks. Tony's an interpreter. I'm an interpreter. I mean, I've come a long way from detailing staircases. I got to tell you that. It wasn't a lot of fun. One of them is in France, so you can go and see it if you really
Is it
want.
still there?
It's at the Centre Pompidou. Okay, you really don't want to look at it, but that's
I
enough.
do. Oh my God.
Okay,
Okay. It's at the
long time
museum.
ago.
Okay.
Long time ago. I didn't do the fountain, but the um, the interpreter basically says, I know all this stuff. I can apply it in all sorts of strange
Yeah.
and wonderful combinations.
Yeah.
You cannot move to the right of your career. Start to apply what you know about shared services and put it in a different context, or what you know about shared services and make it up, because
Yeah.
interpreters make things up unless you can take risk. So people who are experts and leaders typically don't have a big risk profile. If you're an interpreter, you better have your mortgage paid and your kids out of school, to be very honest, because it's not necessarily steady. You'll find most of our interpreters are later in life because of the risk profile. But you can't just become an adapter and interpreter, go out of GBS unless you have a brand of sorts. Unless you stand for something, unless someone can see, this person knows this and they can solve this because that's part of their innate brand.
Yeah.
So most of our GBS people, to be honest with you, do not create their own brands. And that's a huge miss. That's an absolutely huge miss. But it takes a long time to create a brand, because when you do, other opportunities open up. There's a gentleman who was in GBS in the US who I informally coached, who wanted to have a portfolio life, wanted to be an interpreter. And we talked about the fact he had to write. We talked about the fact he had to show up. We talked about the fact he had to have an opinion, even though people might not like his opinion. People will respect an opinion they don't like if they think it's well-grounded, even though they don't agree with it. And he was able to create an interpretive career, but it takes a lot of work. And most of us think, I really don't have time to create a brand because I've got so much work to do. This is investing in yourself. And to me, it's a non-negotiable.
I think it's absolutely critical if you have any kind of aspirations to go beyond what you're doing. But the thing that excites me about the four personas and the framework that Deb just shared, Tim, is that I feel like for the industry, for the first time, we start to have a structure where young people can essentially figure out what their strengths are, what they want to be, and
Yeah.
then they can start moving in that direction. Um, I can tell you that looking at the glass half full, as I always do, with all of the turmoil happening in the GBS industry, there is going to be a lot of change. There's no doubt about it. That's not the question. The question is, what are you as an individual going to do about yourself? Not about changing the world, but about yourself. I think, and this is the half full piece, I am seeing many, many, many more people try and use their unique GBS experiences
Yeah.
and then translate that into other successes. So for example,
Yeah.
I'm seeing many more GBS leaders use GBS as a stepping stone into other careers. As Deb was saying on the top right quadrant, the CFO, the current CFO of Procter and Gamble, was once a GBS young
Is that
person.
right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, and the
Yeah.
reason why
And
you have more and more,
Amex
and
too was a rotation through.
there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
You see them scattered around,
Yeah.
not
Yes.
pervasive, but there are some.
Yes, there are some and growing, and that is the point. Now, what is it about GBS that actually helps these people get successful? Well, in a steady old company, you have this organization that is all about constant change. That's
Yeah.
about transformation. That's about either you grow or your job is gone, right? That is exactly the cooker, if you will,
Yeah.
that develops great talent that can then be reapplied. And so that's, I think, the opportunity of what Deb's talking about.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I'm going to warn you about something. Part of the problem we have, the imperative to master capabilities right now has never been greater, because a lot of what we do is execution, which is going to go away. And unless we develop the capabilities that allow us to orchestrate, to see between value streams, and able to direct networks, the skill set is going to be not radically different, but it's going to change. And we better start focusing on those
Yeah.
capabilities right now. We don't really have a choice.
Yeah,
Listen,
we
I
have
think
to
that
invest. Yes, exactly, in ourselves. Sorry, Tim.
no, I think that's a really nice place to sort of bring the conversation to, which is because actually you started off, Deborah, saying we need this to think about career development, the career pathways and framework for within a GBS. And what I've been thinking all the way through is thinking about, so what would the advice be if we were starting out? Like if I'm sitting here listening to this or watching this, and then I find, well, actually, I'm in an execution job. Well, what's the advice, right? Maybe you've got some. I don't know, but because it sounds like there is something coming that you're going to need to respond to, and so what can a person do to get ready for that? And I can tell you that having seen a lot of people grow up through a GBS and go out into other roles within the GBS and outside, it's a fantastic thing to watch, right?
Hmm?
In my last team, we had a KPI, which was the percentage of team that are eligible for promotion after 2 years that get promoted or move or get a lateral move. And we measured it inside the team and outside the team. And what I'm so proud of is to see how many of those moves have happened, even after, long after I've left. And
But
because,
those moves are according to an old hierarchy.
yeah,
The hierarchy is going to be torn up.
there you
The
go.
first thing this industry needs to understand
Yeah,
is what is the new organogram look like, and what are the skills and capabilities that are
yeah.
going to be required in that new organogram. So while
So
that
that's the
was fine in
conversation.
old GPS,
Yeah,
new GPS is completely different. And I think you saw it 2 weeks ago,
yeah,
I've come up with a new organogram for the future
yeah,
agentified GBS. I haven't written the job descriptions yet, or the
yeah,
roles, which
yeah,
is on my long list of things to do
yeah,
when I'm sleepless,
yeah,
which is every day. But I think we need to start turning our career planning absolutely inside out and upside down.
yeah.
I can take a crack at that, Tim, from a
yeah,
lost young person, newer to GBS perspective. My advice consistently is three things. Firstly, I think you have to understand that the job that you're given is a means to an end.
yeah,
So what you have to do is not just excel at it, but also transform that current job, even if it was not written in your job description. Because this is not an industry of cheap labor. This is an industry of operate and transform, both,
yeah.
as Deborah said. Okay. So, firstly,
And less emphasis on operate. But you have to
that's
know how
correct.
to operate in order to
Well,
transfer.
yes, you have to have a foundation. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're basically going to create a mess. But exactly. So that's the first thing, which is take the job that you've been given and ask yourself, how do I get myself out of this job by eliminating the need for the job?
Yeah,
That's the most important thing. The
yeah,
second is invest in yourself. Deb is absolutely correct. Um, Routine work is going to transition, and AI is a technology. And just like any other powerful technologies, whether you like it or not, it's here to stay. So what you have to do is not necessarily become an AI programmer, but you have to become an expert on your specific area, which may be
yeah,
accounts payables. What is the best use case of AI, and how can I be among the first people to start using it, or in my organization? So that's the second, which is know enough to be dangerous
Dangerous.
yeah,
to your own particular job. Yes, you
yeah,
don't have to be a generic expert. That's the second thing. The third thing, and again, all of this is advice to the individual, not necessarily to the company. The third thing is that you really, really have to be deliberate about going across. And what I mean by going across is if you want to be a subject matter in finance, accounts payable, that's fine. I'm not going to force you to become a marketing genius in shared services, but you have to understand the different contexts of accounts payables as the role is. Because GBS is an industry of end to end with
yeah,
processes. So even on specialized roles, force yourself every couple of years to go learn something new. Even better is if you can force yourself to learn across, because the best
mm,
way to become an end-to-end transformer is to
mm,
understand the end-to-end and not to get
mm,
bogged down in your own little silo.
mm.
So that's essentially advice that I tend to give
That's
generically,
nice.
whether people want it or not. So
I've written it down. I'll give it to my daughter. Um, I just wanted we're coming towards the end of the time, and I know we started 5 minutes late, but just like to give the last word to you, Deborah, about just th thinking about your involvement with Apex. And I've asked everybody this on these calls: is what have you personally got out of it? Is there anything you've taken away? By the way, I must do my answer to this at some point. I have taken so many things away. The last webcast we did was all about data management, which I'm right in the middle of. And so I listened really intently to Steve and my talking about it. But what is there anything you've personally taken away from the Apex
Well,
experience?
besides being able to hang out with the cool kids.
Yeah, well, that as well.
No, I mean, I think what it does is it puts a microscope, not a microscope so much as perhaps a magnifying glass on what folks are actually doing. I don't believe there's a one size fits all in this industry. So being able to see specific applications, specific of how certain problems are solved, probably in a little bit more depth
Yeah,
is very, very helpful. But one of the things I talked about early on is that GBS, the reason we see so many loyalists in GBS is because GBS organizations are highly contextual.
yeah,
You can only do what you can do, but if you can see what others do and you can adapt it to your environment, to your resources, to the organization's tolerance for risk, to your level of sponsorship, it does give you a leg up.
yeah. Thank you very much. Listen, I'll bring the call to an end there. It was a lively conversation, as we promised. And thank you so much for your time, for both of you, for coming and sharing thoughts on this. For anyone that's interested, that's got this far, that's interested in this, go to the Apex GBS website. You can download the chapter of the book. We will do another call next month as well. So please do sign up for that. And I really look forward to speaking to you all again. But thank you, Tony and Deb. Take care.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay.